Did you know that somebody can legally use part of your land? Has a neighbour come up to you and asked you if they can run a pipe through your backyard? If so, this is called an easement. An easement is a legal concept. It's basically a right to use your land. A common one is a drainage easement, if they want to run a pipe through your land to drain water. Other ones are a right of carriageway, if they can drive a car through part of your land. Right of walkway, if they can walk through it. Easements for light, all sorts of easements. The one I want to talk about today is drainage easement, because that's the most common one. A lot of people are getting approached by neighbours and developers and asked if they can grant a drainage easement to do their development. Usually it's because the council has asked them to get that as part of their condition for approval. I'll be talking about this process in 3 parts. The first part is how it starts, the second part is the negotiations, and the third part is the court process. So how it starts, the neighbour usually comes up and says, hey, I'm doing a development. Council has told me I need to drain some water through your land. Is that going to be okay? Usually people hear that, they're a bit apprehensive about it. They're thinking, what does this mean? How does it affect me? Then you'll start to see a valuation come through saying, this is how much it's worth if we put an easement through your land, this is how much compensation you'll get. Then you'll start to see comments about Section 88K of the Conveyancing Act, which is a court process where the court can force you to grant your neighbour an easement. Step 2 is the negotiation process. In the negotiation process, you'll be talking to your neighbour about whether you want to grant the easement and how much you might want to charge them. You might also want to be talking about the terms of the easement. For example, you might put in conditions about where it's located. You might put in conditions about when it can be maintained and so on and so forth. All that kind of stuff. That's the second part. Now, if negotiations fail, or if it looks like negotiations are going to fail, sometimes as a pressure tactic, the neighbour might start court proceedings. That's step 3. The way the court process works is this. The court doesn't have to, but may grant an easement over your land in favour of your neighbour if it's reasonably necessary, if they've compensated you adequately, if it's not against the public interest, and if they've tried to negotiate with you and it just hasn't worked out. So you have to meet those 4 elements. Usually, having a council approval gives them the first element of necessity and also the public interest component, or that's what they'll say. The compensation bit is a bit more difficult. How much should you get for your easement? That's for negotiation, but also, how much does it affect your use of the land? If someone wants to run a pipe in a really inconvenient spot, it's probably something that requires a different kind of compensation. The compensation can be not necessarily in a monetary form, but something to just make good the inconvenience and the disturbance. The last bit, the negotiations, is the difficult bit. If you're in good faith talking to them, then usually that's fine. That negotiation element is usually for people who are just not replying or being very difficult, or saying, I'll give you an easement, but I want $10 million for it. So that's for that particular element. If all of those 4 components are satisfied, then and only then could the court grant an easement. But they still don't have to. And if they do choose to grant an easement, and you've generally been doing the right thing, the person who wants the easement, so your neighbour, is going to have to pay your legal costs. So that's a snapshot of how the whole process works. There's plenty of opportunity in there to negotiate what you would like as an ideal outcome. And there's plenty of rigor in the process to make sure that nothing untoward happens.